All right, thank you for staying with Business Today. Now we get to our conversation of the day where we're looking at Kenya's industrial landscape. And joining us is Zakaria Lukorito, who is the Acting Director of Kenya Bureau of Statistics. Thank you so much for joining us on Business Today.
Thank you very much. It is Kenya Bureau of Standards, not statistics.
Oh, statistics. Oh, standards.
Standards.
Okay, thank you so much for that. All right, so now let's look at the industrial landscape. When you look at Kenya's industrial landscape, in terms of growth, where are we growing towards to? Because now every industry is trying to move into the digital space. In terms of growth, from where you sit?
Thank you very much. From where I sit, there have been a steady growth over the years, although there was stagnation at one point, but then we've picked up and we are moving pretty on well. Basically, when you look at the industrial atmosphere within the country, you will realize that there's a lot of growth in the agro-based industries as opposed to the engineering and manufacturing sector. Looking at, for example, the automotive sector, it has been a steady growth, but not to that level that we aspire to be at. Look at the manufacturing of electrical components. We are not yet there, but we are moving towards there. Therefore, there is a steady growth overall, but then we need to look at how this can be fast-tracked. Basically leveraging on technology and standards, and we've mentioned moving to digital transformation also, yes, which is very important. And for us as a standards body, we are looking at how can we even transform the standards into being smart standards. People don't want to have standards which they need to interpret, but we need to have standards that can be fed into the machine and they interpret the product into the requirements. Therefore, we are looking at smart standards in that sphere on how can we revolutionize our standardization process so that we have standards that are smart, being incorporated in the machinery, in the equipment, in the manufacturing sector, so that they are directly interpreted into the products, so that the requirements coming out are already at that level that standards prescribe.
Okay, right, very well explained. Now, when we look at also, because you've spoken about the automotive industry, you've spoken about the developments that are there. When you look at innovations also, the innovations within this particular type of industry. And now the other day, Kenya introduced its own mobile phone that is assembled in Kenya. When you look at things that are really developing within this kind of industry, and also the other assembly that was also opened for assembling vehicles also, just I think a couple of weeks ago. When you look at all these developments that are happening, in terms of now the standards that KEBS always speaks about, how are you coming in order for you to make sure that at least the industries that are being opened are now coming in to follow the standards that are supposed to be there?
One of the things we are doing is to work with the innovators at all levels, right from the standards initiation process. Then when it comes to development of the standards, we ensure that the requirements are properly captured in the standards. Then moving forward, after the development process, and then we move to the implementation phase, where we work closely with the innovators again to see that the requirements that were captured in the standards are properly interpreted. Going back to what you've mentioned about the innovations, there are quite a number of them coming up. We've seen mobile phones being innovated here, and we are leveraging not only on the national standards, but looking at the regional standards and where there is also best international practices, and then we are looking at international standards. This week, we've also been privileged to have the International Electrotechnical Commission Secretary General visiting us and seeing how can we use the electrotechnical standards in developing some of these standards. And for us, as we move forward, we shall be working with the innovators closely to see how IEC standards can be used in those innovations that I'm mentioning about the lithium-ion batteries, looking at the electrical vehicles, and looking also at mobile phones as well, and looking at the entire sector of manufacturing. Specifically, as I've mentioned, engineering has not been doing well, but with standards in place, we are looking forward to working closely with the innovators, those in the automotive sector, those in the IT sector, as well as electrotechnical sector, and not only focusing on those ones, but looking at the very primary sectors like agro-processing also. We are having quite a number of new products being generated, including the leather sectors, and all these sectors, we need to work with them together so that whatever they produce does not only meet the national standards, but it goes beyond the national standards to meet the regional standards as well as international standards, so that we do not remain local, but we also export to other countries and be competitive at that level.
All right, and it's good that you've mentioned about exporting and also the regional standards. And when we look at the regional standards, of course, we cannot miss to speak about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And now, how is KEBS aligning with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area? Because this other the AFCFTA is coming up with its own way of trading, and now there's also a KEBS that has its own standards. Now, how is it aligning with the AFCFTA?
If you specifically look at Article 6 of the AFCFTA agreement, it clearly identifies a number of organizations in the standardization space, like AFSEC, which deals with the electrotechnical standards in Africa. We also have ARSO, which is dealing with the standardization and harmonization of standards across the African continent. Therefore, basically, as a national standards body, we are a member of the ARSO community. Therefore, we're working together with other partners or members of the ARSO across the continent, in the East African community, in the EGOWAS region, in SADC region, as well as in the North region. All countries are coming together to see that they do not remain with their own national standards, but we have one standard harmonized across the African continent, so that when you are manufacturing your product in Kenya, it's easier for you to access the West African market, be it in Nigeria or Ghana, or South African market. Look at Zambia, Zimbabwe, and South Africa, or North Africa. Look at Egypt and Tunisia, Morocco, and all those countries. Therefore, what we are doing as a national standards body is to look at what you already have and what are the commonly traded products in Africa, so that we harmonize standards for those products and have one standard across the continent. That will remove for multiplicity and application of standards across different regions, where, for example, Kenya could be having its own standard, Ghana its own standard, South Africa own standard. Therefore, when you want to export a product, for example, from Kenya to Ghana, then you will be required to meet the Ghanaian standard. If you want to export to South Africa, then you meet South African standard. Therefore, we can count about 54 countries in Africa with different standards. You have to manufacture your products meeting 54 different standards. But when you harmonize, for example, and have just one standard for a product that is agreed and acceptable across Africa, then you only manufacture your product meeting one standard, and once you test that product and it meets the requirements of that standard, you have the certificate that product will be accepted everywhere. Therefore, it generally reduces your production costs. You only have one line producing one product with all the standards, and you access 54 countries.
All right. Still on that, 54 countries, and every country has its own standard of grading maybe the products that are there. Now, when you look at now having this one harmonized standard, how easy is it? Because of course, 54 countries, it's really difficult, especially when you have one standard that is covering the whole continent. So what goes into this?
Thank you very much. I think it's a very complicated process, but with the determination and the agreement in the AFCFTA, and recognizing that products will not access markets without standard. Therefore, most of the countries have come together and become members of ARSO, which is the African Organization for Standardization. Therefore, different national standards bodies, including KEBS, are members of that regional standardization body. Therefore, when they come together again, we have to agree on a common standard. Fortunately for us in the East African community, we've gone ahead and harmonized quite a number of standards that we are already using in the East African community as common standards. For example, if you look at the standard for maize, is one in the East African region. You look at the standards for quite a number of products, be it steel bars, we have harmonized them in the region already. Therefore, the other countries in Africa are looking at East African community as an example. And for us, Kenya, we take the lead in that space, so that we use the already harmonized standard in East Africa as a basis for harmonizing African standards. And quite a number of other African countries have been receptive of this idea. Therefore, there are quite a number of East African standards that have already been harmonized, that are being used as a basis to harmonize the African standard. As you've rightly mentioned, it's a very complicated process, but then the other countries have seen East African community going ahead already in the past and deepening trade and widening within the region. Therefore, they are looking at that good example and learning from us. Therefore, we've taken leadership in quite a number of ARSO technical committees which harmonize standards, therefore giving direction and actually bring quite a number of other countries to learn from the best that we've already set in the East African community. Yes, it's a complicated process, but the other countries are looking forward and willing to cooperate, and also in the spirit of or AFCFTA implementation. Then we are working together towards that end. And for information, additionally, already we have harmonized over 1,300 standards on different products across Africa. Therefore, we already have those common standards, 1,300 standards that will be used to facilitate the full implementation of AFCFTA.
All right. And now, when you look at harmonizing standards, of course, there are challenges, because when it comes to such a process, you have to come across different challenges. Now, when you are harmonizing standards in different countries and, of course, in different regions, what are some of the challenges that you've been able to encounter, and how do you make sure that at least at the end of the day you are on the same page?
Thank you very much. Standards are developed by stakeholders from different sectors, because we have to meet requirements for consumers, we have to meet the requirements for manufacturers, then there are also requirements for regulators in different sectors. Therefore, again, we come together and discuss. And then standards development, there is a concept of consensus, which means you do not have to agree 100%. But if you see that requirements is about 80% agreeable, and then 20% is not agreeable, sometimes we call it consensus so that you can move forward. You give and take. If 80% is okay, most countries will agree that let us move on, let us implement the standard. If there are challenges, then we can relook at them again, because again, standards are living documents. Once you are harmonized, a standard can be revised, it can be amended at any opportune time if it's not meeting the demands or the requirements in the market. Therefore, as we have rightly mentioned, there are quite a number of challenges, because each country will come with their own requirements. But then in the spirit of consensus and moving forward as a continent, some of them will give up their requirements and agree with the common requirements. And one of the key things that we have leveraged on is that standards are also science, they should be data-based. Therefore, again, when you come with a requirement that is not backed up by data, then it's difficult to convince the other partner states or members to agree on your requirement. Therefore, again, we are building capacity within our testing facilities and our manufacturing sector so that they have data-based evidence to provide the requirements that go into the standard. And once you have this scientific data, it's almost obvious that you cannot change it. And the people will agree with the requirements that are being set based on scientific data that's available. Of course, we are looking at three things. We are looking at performance requirements. We are also looking at safety requirements and looking at environment protection. Again, looking at it that environment has become very important globally. People will be more inclined to looking at the standards that can address climate change and environment issues.
Okay, all right. And now let's also move and look at SMEs, because they are also in this. And when you look at standardization and the approach that KEBS has towards supporting Kenyan SMEs, how does it happen, and how do you leverage opportunities that are provided for in the even Africa Free Continental Trade Area?
Thank you. Within KEBS, if I may start at KEBS first, we've developed an SME policy that's encouraging SMEs to manufacture and come to KEBS at preferential rates in terms of payments, and also facilitating them to move their products from just being SME products and becoming products that can be valued, products that can also be accepted as meeting the requirements in those three aspects that I mentioned: being safe, being also environment friendly, and looking at also at the performance requirements. Therefore, SME, we've worked with them quite for a long time, and we've developed quite a number of them, starting from very small or micro, and then growing into medium, and even becoming larger manufacturers. Therefore, in this space, we are working closely with the SMEs. We mentor them, we train them on how to meet the requirements in the standard, and we also facilitate them in terms of payments so that their products can be certified. Because ultimately the aim of developing SMEs is to have their products certified so that they can be acceptable. Again, when you move to the technical committees, we've made them open. We have opened up involvement in the technical committee work, where we develop those standards so that SMEs can also be incorporated, so that we listen to them also and have their requirements captured in the standards, so that we do not cater for the requirements of only big manufacturers, but even the small manufacturers, so that the requirements are also captured in the standards to encourage them to move up the ladder in that direction. Therefore, looking at that one again, quite a number of our technical committees have for SMEs in them, and the requirements are captured. Also, when you go to the harmonization process, we encourage SMEs to join our technical committees and deliberations so that we have a common position as a country before we move to the harmonization table so that our requirements and the requirements specifically for SMEs are captured in those standards.
All right. Another issue, especially when it comes to products, let us look at counterfeit products in the industry, because I think, was it yesterday, the other day, there was a crackdown on that. And also KEBS, you've done a crackdown on counterfeit. When it comes to a crackdown on counterfeit and you find a product has a sticker, a KEBS sticker, and it's also counterfeit. So what usually happens when it comes to this?
Thank you very much. Perhaps let me start by differentiating between a substandard product and a counterfeit product.
Yes.
That will make sense for most of us who are listening, so that we can differentiate what a substandard product is and what a counterfeit product is.
Yes.
A counterfeit product, basically somebody would call it a fake. It's a copy of the original. Perhaps a certain brand has established itself in the market and somebody wants to mimic it, so that they can also leverage on the sales of that product to access the market. Sometimes, and in most cases, fake products may not meet the requirement, but it's not a guarantee that they will be substandard. Substandard means you are not meeting the minimum requirements. Therefore, it's possible that you can have a counterfeit product that is standard. It means all the requirements in the standard, but at times you may have a counterfeit product which is a fake, but does not also meet the requirements of the standard. Therefore, when you talk about a substandard product, it means that you are not meeting the set minimum requirements of a standard.
And
a counterfeit
may not necessarily be counterfeit.
And it may not necessarily be, a counterfeit may not necessarily be a substandard product.
Okay.
That's what I would say. Therefore, look, going back to what you are saying, I think a counterfeit, we also work with other agencies like the Kenya Counterfeit Authority, which deals with the counterfeit product copies, so that people are infringing on somebody's right or intellectual property. We work with them closely so that as they confiscate these products also, we also check on the requirement in the standard. Are they meeting the minimum requirements also? Therefore, we work closely with them to see if the standard is counterfeit and at the same time it's also substandard. And then if your product fails in two aspects, then will be prosecuted based on the two requirements. There is a requirement for a counterfeit and there is a requirement for a substandard. Therefore, for us, for a substandard, we have to test and ensure that the minimum requirements have not been met. But for a counterfeit, if there is evidence that actually that product has been copied, then you are counterfeiting it. Therefore, we work closely with the anti-counterfeit agencies and the other agencies in the market, including the police, when we work on these products to meet that they are not counterfeit, they are also not substandard, and they are safe for consumer use across the country.
All right, and now let's look at the stickers, the KEBS stickers. Do we have different categories of those stickers, or is just one that is standard? And what goes into the process of looking at, okay, this product will have this sticker, if that is if there is a category?
Basically, the requirements of the standard is for us to have a standardization mark, which is an S mark. Fortunately, I don't have a copy of differentiated. There are two important marks. One of them is the standardization mark, and the other one is the import standardization mark. That will differentiate what has been imported in the country from what has been manufactured locally. But basically, the standard is the same. We are meeting the same minimum requirement of the standard. Therefore, if you meet the minimum requirement of the standard, you get what we call standardization mark. And that standardization mark is equivalent to import standardization mark, which also means you've made the same standard, but you are importing a product. A product has not been manufactured from here. Therefore, there are those two basic standards. But there's also a superior mark of quality called diamond mark of quality. That's if you've already made the minimum requirements, and you have consistently producing above the minimum requirements, then you stand out amongst other manufacturers or service providers, then you get what you call diamond mark of quality.
That is, I think, what...
That's a superior mark.
That's what I think most products usually have, right?
What they have is, most products have standardization mark.
Okay.
But there is a superior mark. If you want to go beyond the minimum requirements and they stand out amongst your peers, then you go for the diamond mark of quality. Therefore, there's a process that goes into the whole range of this one. There's usually, if you are a manufacturer in Kenya, our quality assurance officers have to assess your manufacturing processes, have to ensure that your production processes are consistent and are producing the same requirements, meeting the requirements of the standard. Then you have to make an application at KEBS. We shall process it, sample your products from the marketplace, from where you are manufacturing from, so that we also ensure that what you are going to test is actually coming from your promises. Therefore, we do that. Our quality assurance will come and sample your products, take them for testing. Once they test and they evaluate them and see that they actually meet the minimum requirement, they process and issue with standardization mark. Therefore, what we are moving forward just to counter the counterfeit or the stickers.
Yes.
Nowadays, we do not allow manufacturers to stick on their products.
Okay.
They have to incorporate the standardization mark in the labeling requirement. Therefore, it becomes part of the label. But going beyond that one, if you still go ahead and fake or incorporate a standardization mark in your labels, there's a way we can get it. We have developed an app where you can verify by entering the SM. There is SM stroke hash, and then there's a number there. Therefore, basically, that's one of the ways you can use the app to verify. We also have SMS number, which is 20023. You can also send a text message to that number, starting with SM, then you put a hash, then there's always a number below the sticker. Include that number in full, and then send. Then the message will come back to you, or indicating whether the product is valid, when it was certified, when will the permit expire. Therefore, that's one of the verification methods that we are using, also to encourage consumers to be checking their products before they consume.
Okay. All right. Even as we come now to conclusion of this conversation, going forward, now we have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, we have the East African, we've said we have one standard that is working in East Africa, and Kenya is the leading when it comes to that. Now, when it comes to now the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, with the talks that are going on, going forward, what are we looking at? Are we nearing having one standard for the whole continent, or what?
Our ultimate aim will be for each product to have just one standard. If, for example, the maize grain, one standard across the continent. If you are, for example, producing tires for road vehicles, then one standard for the tires across the country. That's what we are looking at ultimately, so that we don't have duplicity of standards across the continent. That will minimize your production cost, and you also ensure that your product can access 52 countries, as I mentioned, without any hindrance or barrier. This is one of the requirements in the AFTA, that we need to break down the barriers of trade and also ensure that goods and services are moving freely across the country if they meet the requirements and they are safe for consumers. And we are very close to that. I have already indicated to you that we have harmonized over 1,300 standards, and we are still on the road of harmonizing more standards. Okay. By the time we hit the 10,000 mark, then we shall be there to trade freely across the country with most of the products. Okay. In Kenya alone, we already have 10,600 standards. Therefore, again, we are looking at how can we use the already developed Kenya standards as a basis for us to harmonize African standards. Therefore, we are looking at coming up with over 10,000, 15,000 standards that have been harmonized.
All right. And thank you so much. We just have to stop it right there. Our time is up. That is Zachariah Lukorito, who is the acting director at KEBS, speaking to us about the industry, quality of industry in Kenya, and what the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is doing in terms of trying to standardize products and also come up with one product. All right, we've come to the end of this edition of Business Today. My name is Kelvin Yakundi. Stick around. Mbiu ya KTN is coming up next.